Hello and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. I gotta say, it's not entirely easy making this plucky little show as it may seem. I mean, it kind of sort of is editing it all, but sometimes things in life in the real world can get in the way, and sometimes you can just never get your videos done and out there on time. Not helped by spending time with family, not just in this home, but in other places, which can be nice, except it's just kind of delay stuff. Plus the constant mood changing of the weather, and the fact that we as a country lost again in a big football finale. Sometimes it just makes you wish you could just travel back in time and kind of undo all the bad stuff that happened, or just kind of alter things just a bit to make them right. Which may be selfish, but hey, it's actually kind of fitting since I'm talking about an album that's about time travel. And as some of you may know, a couple of weeks ago I looked at the ELO album Zoom, an album of 20 years ago that was kind of meant to be the comeback for Jeff Lynne and the Electric Light Orchestra, but we had to wait another 14 years to make yet another comeback album. So some of us may be wondering, what really happened to the Electric Light Orchestra to make them decline in popularity? Some say it was with albums such as Secret Messages and Balance of Power. Some say it was Discovery, how it kind of downplayed the orchestral elements in a more disco-like sound. Or some say it was the soundtrack to the movie Xanadu and how it kind of damaged the reputation as a possible theory. However, there's another album that kind of fell in between all that, yet this one still gained something of a cult following, especially those who are fans of electronic music and the ideas of retrofuturism, the idea of a possible future kind of idealized and envisioned by people of a very distant past, like the steampunk of Victorian eras. And this album was, of course, fairly enough, released 40 years ago, and it goes under the very simple title of Time. And well, that's not a bad name for an album. It's just that with many songs and albums that may have the simple title of Time, such as, well, the Pink Floyd song Time, it can get a little bit lost and confusing among other albums, but hey, it's simple enough. One word title and all that. And as for the cover itself, it's very simple and to the point. It has the classic ELO logo on top what is presumably the planet Earth, and it depicts space as this kind of watery kind of ocean, just like a literal ocean of space, and a very pale peachy orange plain outside. It may not have much to do with time travel, but it does kind of capture the theme, the very imagery associated with science fiction, and it does have that kind of existential vibe to it. And with that cover, let's talk about the actual music itself. And as with any other concept album, or in particular ELO's last actual concept album, or only other one, El Dorado, this one begins with a prologue, and a very eerie yet very grand and epic one. We begin with a very beautiful and as you expect from a band called Electric Light Orchestra, a very symphonic techno-electronic synth piece that's accompanied by a vocoder enhanced kind of, shall I say, kind of prelude, like with such vague, like a setup to this rock opera with phrases like "beyond the borders of your waking mind, there lies another time, where darkness and light are one." So, is it referencing Bionicle? and it kind of refers to this whole story as a message from another time, as if this were a cautionary tale or something. And then that build up leads into the first proper song of the album, Twilight. Obviously not connected to Twilight Sparkle from My Little Pony, and fortunately and thankfully nothing to do with those Twilight books and movies. Ugh. However, regardless though, this song is definitely an epic starter to the song, and the closest I would compare it to is Barbara O'Reilly from the Who's album Who's Next, which, by the way, I will be getting into sometime down the road later this year. Anyways, this song is high class synth pop, just high energy entertainment, and it's pure awesome and fun. And that's not just going into the lyrics, which seem to set up at least vaguely how this protagonist found themselves from their initial time period to the future year of 2095, which I'll probably be which I'll probably be at the latest 90s myself at that point. But anyways, it doesn't exactly explain how he ended up there, or who or what got him there, or how and whatnot. But still, that vagueness does help in leaving it to the imagination of the listeners. And the way he addresses this Twilight as possibly another person or a group of people seems to imply that he was somehow taken from his place, or rather, he was in a dreamlike state, and he's just been delivered here as a kind of trial, or like a lesson to be learned, which we'll be getting into later. But anyways, while it may lack in the classic strings and choirs that the ELO are known for, it does make up for it for Jeff Lynne's extravagant vocals and Beth Bevan's very hyperactive drums, and of course the synth by Richard Tandy. And I gotta say, they're the true masters of this band. And apparently some folks at Japan thought something similar as well, since apparently in 1983 they used this song and the previous, without permission of course, as part of an opening animation for the Daikon 4 convention back in 83, and the folks who did the animation would go on to form Gainax, which created many brilliant animes such as Nadia the Secret of Blue Water and Neon Genesis Evangelion. So that's two things I like, apparently: prog rock and anime. Can't we get more of this marriage in heaven? Aside from JoJo Bizarre Adventure memes? Anyway, the song ends with a bit of an interlude. The sounds of wandering footsteps, as if this protagonist is wandering into this far-off future, all the while accompanied by what seems to be very distant, very digitally enhanced vocals, which sound a bit like gibberish at first, but later on I'll explain to you what it actually is. Well, anyways, that itself then brings us to the next song, Yours Truly, 2095. This one definitely continues on the very electronic nature of Twilight, if not the whole album, as well as kind of gives us a first taste of how this man adjusts to being stuck in this culture shock, this far off future of over a century ahead. And here, he apparently kind of becomes attracted to this female android, or as he would put it, an IBM, and kind of feels conflicted about it. And while he may find her attractive, almost reminding him of a past love interest from his own time period, she does this machine. She doesn't feel the same, and I think and considering today we have technology and machines that and electronics that attempt to mimic human emotions and expressions, yet even we as actual flesh and bone actually know that something's off, like some kind of uncanny valley, if you will. This does feel relevant. And speaking of relevant, we have a man in a far future becoming sort of attracted to a machine, a female machine, and feeling conflicted about it. Is this the plot to that Spike Jonze Her movie? Anyways, the chorus bit of 2095, 2095, I love you, sincerely, yours truly, does really have that kind of bitterness, almost tragicness to that sound, that very very digitally enhanced, almost robotic in a way, as if this person is already being melded to this this almost conformist, almost cold mechanical society. And when we get to the middle eight bit of is that what you want? Is this what you really want? It it just goes bombastically epic. Almost something out of Queen or something. It just feels that beautifully epic, as if the hero is managing to break free and try to speak some actual voice of humanity, some voice of reason. And then soon enough the song just kind of stops altogether. Which that itself brings to the next song, Ticket to the Moon. Beginning with a very simple Elton John-esque piano riff, Jeff Lynne, or rather the protagonist, kind of recalls the 1980s where he came from and how he feels nostalgic for it, and kind of expressing his desire to go back already. And of course talking about how he has a ticket to the moon, whether it be a literal one where he's actually taking a flight to the moon, which I hope we kind of actually do have a colony there by the 2090s, or maybe it's a metaphorical ticket, as the title itself is probably a kind of deconstruction of the classic phrase of "I love you to the moon and back," which normally refers to a strong love or affection to someone, and how their love will last forever and all that. However, the moon is still very far away, and it would take it how it can really take miles to fly all the way to the moon and back. And this song does help kind of emphasize that feeling of wanting and that melancholic tone and atmosphere. Then we get to the chorus where not only do those classic strings pick up, but also where the usual Beatlesque sound really shows, and that kind of influence and whatnot. And then the bridge between the chorus and the verse, which usually consists of these like strange audio sounds like beeps and distorted kind of vocal kind of communication calls, as if it was taken from like the archived recordings of some space travel, like the Apollo flight, like the Apollo missions or something. And then there's that bit that kind of occurs one time, the fly through a troubled sky unto a new world that shines so bright. It kind of, it really kind of it kind of gets to your feels there. It almost reminds me a bit of that bit alone kind of feels like something out of Bohemian Rhapsody or something. And then we get to the rest of the verses where the protagonist kind of expresses the desperation of how they really want to get back, yet this ticket is one way, and then may and he kind of kind of acknowledges the fear and concern that there may never be a way back. He may never get back to where he came from, and he's kind of stuck here forever, possibly for the rest of his life. Nonetheless, though, this is still a very sweet and beautiful song that, considering its lyrics and its kind of music, I would still consider it space rock, or at least space pop. And it does kind of give off the imagery of being inside a ship floating across space with the Earth nearby, and the Earth and the moon just ahead, and just almost something out of 2001: A Space Odyssey or something. And if you're geeky enough, you could dream about that classic ELO spaceship, of course. Then we have The Way Life's Meant to Be. Continuing the sort of changing of styles and genres over the songs, this one has more of a Spanish flamenco kind of vibe with the classical guitar and those little castanet things. The song also continues the melancholic themes of things and the things around us changing, and how we feel nostalgic for things in the past, how they looked like, what they mean to us back then and now, and how we either kind of feel like we just want them changed back to where they were, or we never really appreciate we always took them for granted, never really truly appreciated the things and people we knew and had in the past until we lose them many years later, and how over a century later they may never stick around. And this is reflected in both the music and in the lyrics, as this character gazes around the town and sees all these strangers, and kind of reflecting and remembering the person he loved from back then, and how she's not really around anymore. It's been over 100 years, and specifically, and this song specifies that this person was from 1981, which is the year the album came out. So it's not. So it kind of arguably conflicts with the lyric from the previous song, the good old 1980s, since he hasn't experienced the entirety of the decade at that point yet. But I guess it's just kind of a little taste of what the decade would be like. And in the end, it kind of, this is his album at its most bitterness, its most saddest, its most heartbreaking. And you do also hear that in Jeff Lynne's vocals, especially when he repeats the line of, "Is this the way life's meant to be? Is life meant to keep changing even if we object to it? Should we evolve with them? It just kind of deep questions overall." And when he reaches that last note at the last repeating of "meant to be," boy, does Jeff sound like he's singing at an opera. It is that wrenching. And that brings us to the last song of side one, Another Heart Breaks. An absolutely beautiful, and that's saying much considering much I've said of this album. This is a very beautiful piece of guitar, synthesizers, and drum machines, and pure sort of techno serenity. And I would consider it an instrumental However, it does have a bit of recurring phrase of Jeff Lynne saying, "Another heart breaks." Aside from that, it's it's very atmospheric and very, 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 for lack of a better word, it's almost it's almost has the almost feels like this person is wandering down this the city out late at night, just wandering and lamenting and reminiscing and kind of looking around this otherworldly place that he doesn't feel right in, and just kind of feel his heart breaking that the world doesn't entirely feel as utopian as one may think. And you just get that from the music alone. It doesn't need any lyrics or any actual dialogue. It just needs a simple phrase and a beautiful mix of synth and rock music. And it is probably one of the best instrumental songs, even I'm kind of cheating with that kind of label. And the bits that the guitars actually play, you don't really get the instance that there are an actual guitar. More like a synth trying to mimic a guitar, but it still feels melancholy and bittersweet enough that you really don't really care all that much. You just feel that emotion, like like how even though most of the album, like such as Yours Truly 2095, has been kind of a critique of robots and machines trying to mimic human appearance. This one kind of feels like a robot trying to actually try to go for the effort of conveying genuine emotion through the means of music. And to me personally, it accomplishes that, and accomplishes it very well. If you love the classic 80s synth music that almost sounds like something out of an old 80s thriller film, like a sci-fi or like a crime detective thriller drama or something, I think you'll love this kind of song because it is beautiful. So we begin with side 2 with Rain is Falling. Yeah, like I've kind of brought up back in my Zoom review, Jeff Lynne loves to sing and write about rain. Not just the classic Concerto for a Rainy Day, but he would at least mention it in like one or two other songs in each of the ELO albums. But anyways, this one still kind of fits in that melancholy vibe for most of the album, and with the protagonist kind of looking out the window, I'm guessing between Ticket to the Moon and Way Life Meant to Be, he just kind of flew back from the moon back to Earth, I guess. I don't know. And it kind of carries on his lament about how even though it's been like over 100 years since his time, not much has really changed as much as one would think in over 100 years. How people still kind of live the same wasteful lives, wasting all their energy, and kind of how we think things will get better, but not as quickly and sooner as one may think. And just kind of, despite all the great inventions and the good intentions, we're still stuck in this kind of dark status quo, and that's symbolized by the grey skies and the constantly falling rain, which probably could be referring to acid rain, which is often said to be caused by pollution. And again, that's just me kind of throwing my 5 cents into it. But considering how a lot of future stories tend to be about environmentalist risks and how they kind of cause consequences like climate change, global warming, all that. This is actually could be seen as a good subtle way of addressing that, even if it's not exactly intentional. Aside from that, though, the music itself definitely feels like one of the more ELO-ish sounding tracks of this album. Well, especially with the whole subtle yet still noticeable Beatles influence, and in both the verses and in the choruses. With the latter, with the recurring phrase of "rain is falling" and "will it wash away all the tears," and kind of how can the rain really wash away all our sorrows, or it just kind of enhances and just kind of builds up and kind of emphasizes them. Next we have "From the End of the World," a more faster paced, almost as much as Twilight and Yours Truly 2099. This one kind of follows the protagonist kind of dreaming about his love interest from the past of the 1980s and attempting to send a message to her in the form of this dream, trying to connect to her in another world, like a dreamlike world, similar to how the El Dorado album was mostly, if not entirely, about dreams and being in a dreamlike world. And I kind of have to wonder, is he kind of doing that psychically? Is it just kind of him trying to reach a message, just and rather because he's not really sending a message to the actual love interest, just kind of believing he's sending a message to her, or maybe he's psychic, or he's got some kind of fancy futuristic technology to delve into people's minds and dreams. It's the 2090s. I'm sure that could happen. The synth music itself in question does seem very heavily foreshadowing of what we'd eventually get to hear in later albums, in particular Secret Messages and Balance of Power, with it being heavily emphasized on the synth to the point of kind of devoiding any orchestral strings altogether. Even though at the very beginning we do get a bit of a kind of backward sounding string sound, which again I'll kind of bring up later. But of course, in terms of the lyrics itself, the protagonist tries to reach out to his lover through a letter, and just kept waiting for a reply and kept hanging round and round. Kind of sounds like comments and forums in a nutshell, really. Next is "The Lights Go Down," one of the more optimistic songs of the album. This one still deals with this person kind of being worn down and kind of slowly melding and adjusting into this new world, this new society, but still not forgetting his people, his friends and families and loved ones, and his old culture back in his own time, and just kind of feeling more and more conflicted about whether he should just move on and get used to being here, or should he still keep his determination to find a way back, with half believing that things can and are going wrong, and feeling all his dreams just kind of flying away, and how the people he somehow left are still there waiting for him, and how we just kind of how the answers aren't really all that simple. The music itself is also still has that discordant feeling to it, feeling like a happy robo reggae track with a bit of a plucky beat to it that kind of contradicts with the bittersweet lyrics, and as I've kind of stated before with songs of this kind of method and style, I find that pretty cool. You'd get to hear that kind of style get built up upon, especially in the Balance of Power album. Sure, it may not have the classic strings or choirs of the Electric Light Orchestra, but it still is Jeff Lynne's songwriting, it's still his vocals, and it's still his little humble guitar solos. And I still commend him for trying doing something different than what is usually expected from a conventional ELO song. Then we have Here's the News, beginning with a very short counting down blinking sound, which is what you'd hear from a usual radio station where they begin the news, kind of fitting, of course, and a little bit of a piano-ish synth riff that kind of sounds like something out of Tomorrow's World. We really kick off with this fast-paced new wave track that, well, kind of sings about news, specifically news of the future, such as addressing a cure for rocket lag, someone leaving their hind in a plastic bag, though usually I'd be happy if I got sunshine in my plastic bag, and just how someone broke out of a Satellite 2 as reference, which was referenced earlier in Ticket to the Moon. So is Satellite 2 like a spaceport or a prison or both? I don't know. World building? Anyways, this song in particular is in a strophic form, in which all the verses or stanzas are all the same and all consistent, which I think kind of helps mix things up a bit and just kind of put things in a new kind of style, or kind of, shall I say, technique. And it kind of helps kind of represent the monotonous of modern day and both futuristic society as kind of painted and depicted here on this album. And we reach that kind of, and in between each of the verses you'd get these kind of inaudible but still noticeable dialogue of some kind of newscaster talking through like a radio or a TV or whatever and what kind of tech we'll probably have in the 2090s, and then it culminates in like a middle to end bit where everything goes euphoric and the protagonist proclaims, "I want to go home, I want my baby back, I want to go back." And I think it's the point where and kind of continuing off the conflict he felt in The Lights Go Down, he finally makes his choice. I'm gonna go back no matter what. And I guess in kind of news he kind of hears about some new technology or time transporting or whatnot, so he just kind of listens in on this and kind of figures this may be the answer to his problem. And speaking of references, as for that person who broke out of Satellite 2, could that person be 10538? Something to think about. And on top of that, I also like how at the end, when he sings, "Best be careful, it may be you," the "you" kind of gets repeated until it kind of fades out, almost referring to the multiple listeners of the song, which I think is very clever on Jess's part in terms of kind of audio editing and production. And yeah, very genius. As for the music itself, it's still very fun, it's still very energetic, and it's just as evocative as the lyrics themselves. It almost sounds like the kind of music you hear from, say, I don't know, a Sega 32X game, or maybe a PlayStation 1 or 2 game. It has that kind of still has that kind of sci-fi feel to it, if you get what I mean, and it figures because this is about the future. Next is 21st Century Man, a more mellow song compared to the previous tracks, and and definitely sounding the most Beatlesque of the songs. And in fact, if what rumor is to be true, this was apparently written by Joe himself as a tribute to John Lennon himself after his tragic passing in December of 1980, which, considering the time that time was recorded and released, that's probably kind of likely and fitting. The song itself, it does sound like kind of like a spiritual successor to kind of like, in a way, it kind of captures John Lennon's kind of peaceful, kind of uplifting style. In particular, it feels like a spiritual successor to his song Imagine, both musically and lyrically. Even though this one isn't exactly about imagining a world without religions or wars, but rather an omnipotent figure speaking to our protagonist about why he's still feeling so down, sad, and lonely, despite having been given all that the future has offered him, all the good, as if this figure is in denial of all the kind of the bad stuff that comes with it. And soon enough, by the end of the song, the figure decides this person has made his choice. You can have this chance to go back, but don't forget the lessons you've learned from this, and they may help you in creating a better future, a better present. And whether or not you are a 21st century man or not, you still are, well, you're still human. You still have feelings, you still have desires, and there's no shame in that. And the music itself, like I said, it is very John Lennon-esque. It has that almost near step to triumphant feeling. And I kind of wish this should have been a single. And yeah. However, one other thing I will address is that by the end of it, we hear that ending bit from the Twilight song again. That little weird kind of gibberish singing bit. That if you actually reverse it, that is actually the chorus of 21st Century Man. Though you ride on the wings of tomorrow, you still wander the fields of your sorrow. And if you know Jeff Lynne, you know he loves that backmasking. He loves reversing tiny bits of music and vocals. He is that sneaky, and yet that he's so genius at the same time. And I can't wait to hear some pseudo Christians out there saying that this is probably a satanic message or something, like with what they claimed from the El Dorado title track. And so the album all culminates in the last song and a half, Hold On Tight. A very fun, bouncy, techno rockabilly track that sings about how no matter how much we get pushed back, no matter how sad or down we may feel, we still gotta keep hanging on. We still gotta keep going, keep fighting and pushing to reach our dreams. And in this case, our protagonist's task and goal to find a way to get back to where he came from, back to the past and back from the future. And the and being old funny old Jeff, he sings the first verse of the song in French midway through the song. Why? Because he's Jeff Lynne and he can sing French. If he could do it, he'll do it. And it's also kind of funny how this song was the first single off the album. Really think about that. That was essentially the climax or like penultimate song of the album is the first single of the album. One would expect like Twilight to be the first song or single, but that became the second single after Hold On Tight. So I guess Hold On Tight kind of held more hits, I guess. I don't know. It's either way, it's still a good song and a good kind of send off to the album before we actually hit the epilogue, which acts as a sort of reprise of 21st Century Man, down to kind of reusing some of the same lyrics. You should be so happy, you should be so glad. Though you ride on the wings of tomorrow, you still wander the fields of your sorrow. However, we kind of get that ending chorus choir bit of Jeff and his teammates kind of singing the simple word of time, time over, and feels it just feels grandiose until we get this kind of weird psychedelic sound similar to the prologue, and it all kind of builds up and it just kind of pauses. It stops. Not unlike the ending of Jeff Wayne's War of the World musical. Jeff Wayne, Jeff Lynne. I should look at that War of the World. Anyways, that ending just kind of leaves you at an ambiguous note, as if to wonder, did our hero actually make it back to the past, or did he end up in another time? Is he stuck where he is? Who knows? We may never find out. And I think that's for the best. And I don't think I could think of any other better way to close off such an album. And with that, ELO's Time is a good interesting mark in the history of electronic and rock music, as well as kind of the themes of retrofuturism and just making a rock opera, just rock operas in general. Sure, even as a concert album or a rock musical opera, it's not exactly big on story or narrative, since most of it is just about our protagonist kind of lamenting about being in this stuck future and wanted to go back in the past where he came from. But concept albums aren't usually meant to have a strong flowing narrative, as one would presume. This kind of has a more slices of life, stream of consciousness kind of feeling, like kind of just experiencing the different bits and pieces, little details of this new futuristic world before deciding that he's better off stuck being in the past. However, he does not forget the lessons he's learned. Sometimes just being there in the past can leave a big mark on the future. So maybe him being sent back is a way of teaching him that maybe we should never take the things we own for granted, and maybe we should help work together to make a better future. And even today, an album like this still feels relevant. We've still yet to reach the 2090s, though most of us will probably be old and dust at that point. But anyways, even if you're not a big expert or fan of ELO, I still give it a try. If you're expecting a big operatic album with strings and choirs and that classic rock and roll Beatlesque style, you may not entirely get that here, aside from a few bits and pieces here and there. But if you love electronic music and just feeling nostalgic for the old 80s music style, I'd say give ELO's Time a bit of a listen. Next time, and hopefully we get another next time, we get back on schedule by looking at another classic album by another classic hard rock band.